Christmas is in the air and I wanted to use the holidays to answer your knitting questions. In a recent community post here on my channel, you had the chance to ask me any question about knitting, and in the following couple of minutes I'm going to answer all of them. So grab yourself a cup of hot chocolate, hot tea, maybe some cookies, and if you still need to finish a knitted gift, then get your needles as well, and I'll dive right into answering your questions. I prepared some cards here with your questions, and I received this first and maybe most important question in so many variations. So because Christmas is all about love, I wanted to answer this one first. So people asked, how do you handle people who think knitting is old-fashioned? Or I keep getting the looks when I knit on the go, or I am quite young and people told me knitting is for grannies. How do you cope with that? Well, I don't. First of all, if they don't pay your bills, pay them no mind. I never understood why people are so obsessed, not only with what others think about them, but what others think in general. As long as I don't hurt nobody, I don't see why I need the approval to have a hobby. If someone else thinks crochet or embroidery is better, well, then good for them. I'll continue knitting. And secondly, knitting is for grannies? Well, that is some horrible ageism. I mean, seriously, what's wrong about grannies? And even if it was true and only grannies knit, well, so what? Does this mean an elderly woman is an inferior part of our society? Seriously, we have to get away from saying you have to be a certain age to do something. Or you can't wear a midriff-bearing top if you are fat, or you can't go clubbing anymore if you are past 40, or, well, if you want to play bingo, then you better be past 60. Seriously, do what you enjoy, I mean, as long as it's legal. And if someone has these old-fashioned views, because that is what is old-fashioned here, well, then that's their problem, right? Besides, if you look at any major fashion label, Dior, Chanel, Dolce & Gabbana, you would notice that all of them will have knitwear as part of their fall-winter collection each year. And quite a bit of that will actually be hand-knit, typically in Southeast Asia, and that's a problem for another video. And if it's crochet, then it will be 100% handmade. So really, it doesn't make any sense. And, how do you cope with that? Well, you don't have to cope with that at all. They need to cope with their outdated and stereotypical views. Here is the second most frequent question I received. Did you ever reach a point of almost putting down your knitting needles for good and walking away from knitting? Or how do you overcome periods of time when you lost your knitting buzz? Absolutely. It happens to me all the time. I mean, this is a hobby and it should bring you joy. And there are times when it doesn't, when it is not what you need right now, or your most recent project frustrated you just so much. And I feel this is quite normal, and it's only human to take breaks. As I said, it happens to me all the time, and I go, I really should be knitting something. I haven't posted anything on Instagram in 2 weeks. But of course, it is a little bit stupid if you think about it. Why force it? If you lost your knitting mojo, then that's that. I mean, I am very glad for any new knitter or old knitter joining or rejoining our community. But this is not work, and there are no obligations, at least not for you. I hope you don't take offense, but even the question, what do you do when you lost your knitting mojo, is a bit, well, silly, I guess, in a way that is like asking, what do you do when you suddenly don't like mac and cheese anymore, or you don't want to continue reading your book? well, nothing happens. If you walk away from your job that pays your bills, well, that is a problem. I mean, I do feel we all benefit from having a hobby, so I would definitely look into something else that brings you joy, that gives you a useful occupation that is not binge watching Netflix. But also, sometimes life happens, and the only thing that you can do is carry on. Take a short break, take a deep breath, and don't dwell on the past. Ultimately, that's all you can do. And then pick up your yarn and start a small project and see what happens. Maybe a little potholder or a coaster. Browse through old books, Revelry, or change something in your knitting or pattern searching habits and see if something sparks your interest. If you only use Revelry, then check out Pinterest or search through knitting tags on Instagram. Maybe go to a local knitting meetup or a local yarn shop, try continental knitting or research Japanese patterns. But if nothing interests you, well, I don't see that there's anything wrong with not knitting a single stitch for a week, for a month, or maybe a year. Come back when it interests you again. And here is another question I received in so many variations. Have you ever tried lever knitting or English throwing? Did you start out with a certain knitting style and change later on? Or what do you think of Norwegian knitting a la Anne and Carlos, where the finger doesn't move? Well, here in Germany, probably everyone starts knitting the continental way. And I think I only learned about English throwing when I was, well, maybe 20 something like that. So about the time when the first online community started to flourish, that was way before Revelry, of course. And I have to say that I wasn't really tempted to switch to English throwing because I saw these people knitting at maybe a quarter of my speed and it involved so much hand motions. Only when I saw flicking years and years later I tried it, but I noticed it's not for me and I had to move my right wrist a lot, and no matter how I tension the yarn, it would give me problems. Well, me. And as for Norwegian knitting and lever knitting and these styles, well, my personal greatest joy are complicated patterns, small needles, knit in the round, and very difficult stitches. And I found that most of these other styles or ways to hold your needles and tension your yarn don't work as well for me when you need to purl 3 together through the back loop and then continue double knitting ribbings or so. But I would like to stress that this is a very, very personal preference and you basically always have to find what works for you and the kind of projects you favor the most. But yes, indeed, I did try out various styles. I stuck to continental knitting because I like that the most. Next, I received quite a lot of questions about my projects. So for example, what is your favorite type of project? If you didn't have professional knitting obligations, what projects would you devote your time to? Well, it's true, I have to do a lot of knitting for this YouTube channel and my blog. But I would say probably socks because they are very easy and so relaxing and quick to finish. I mean, when you start out knitting, you go like 5 double-pointed knitting needles, turning the heel. Wow, so complicated. But of course, once you've knitted 10 pairs or so, it starts to get super easy. And for me, it's very relaxing. I don't even have to look at my knitting when I do knit a plain vanilla sock. But of course you can add as much complexity as you like, add cables, intarsia, color work, a stranded color work, lace, whatever you prefer. So it can be very relaxing but also very challenging. And of course in winter I typically have cold feet, so it's also an item I really like having around, and you never can have enough socks, at least I can't. Then next, what was your most memorable project and why? What is the project you are most proud of? Well, I probably talked about this. So there is a video about vicuña yarn, and last year I knitted these gorgeous gloves from pure vicuña yarn that are just so soft, and I mean they are pretty, and it's memorable for a couple of reasons. First of all, of course, this yarn is outrageously expensive and soft, so that is memorable in and by itself, but also because it was a very challenging project. You know, this yarn is so expensive, so I had to knit a sample using a different yarn. So before I knitted these gloves, I knitted an identical pair using a different yarn, and before I knitted that sample, I came up with a pattern because I really wasn't satisfied with the way you know, the joints here at the fingers turned out, because there were always holes, and even if you watched all the tips that supposedly prevented them, it didn't work. So that was a very memorable project and one I'm very proud of. Next question is, what is the most challenging item you have knit and why? Let's take a sip of tea here. The most challenging item, well, these cherry blossom socks here. They look very pretty, but it's intarsia in the round using 10-15 bubbles, and if you ever did intarsia in the round just with one color change, you know how annoying that can be. And if you have 10 or 15 bubbles, it gets frustrating to a point. You know, I love a challenge, but this was just so horrible, because when you knit intarsia in the round, you shouldn't have a color change at the gap. But of course the pattern moves around, so you constantly need to shuffle around stitches, and then you have to knit back and forth and maintain a tension. So after I finished the first pair, the stitch definition was abysmal. Well, I thought it was abysmal, so I manually readjusted the tension of probably every single stitch, and I really didn't want to continue with the second sock. Well, I did eventually, and I'm very proud with the way they turned out, but I kind of said never again. Next question, what was your first project? I honestly don't know. Well, I do know that I started with these knitting spools, and I still remember that, and I remember faintly knitting swatches and that kind of thing. But my first project, honestly, I don't remember, and my mom didn't keep it, or maybe she did for a time, but we moved so many times in the meantime, it certainly got lost, so I can't really answer you that. So, but if you started, just one note here, if you started knitting later on, well, it definitely remember, you know, putting the first wonky little swatch in a little memory box or so, and then you can always come back, because sometimes you don't feel like you made any progress and your knitting still looks all wonky, and there's so many holes and mistakes, and then you can always go back to that swatch and look, well, it does seem like I made some progress. The next question is, when you started knitting, what kind of projects were you most intimidated by? The projects that felt like a mountain? Quite honestly, I don't remember a single time when I thought I couldn't handle a project. Because I always knew if there was something, you know, a new technique, a new stitch, I could look it up, and in these days and ages it is even so much easier, because you can just go to YouTube or my blog or whatever you prefer, and look it up. So I don't think, and I love a challenge, so I don't think I was ever intimidated by something. Of course, some projects turned out to be a mountain, but I kind of carried on, and then I learned so many new things, and maybe I would redo the project because I wasn't satisfied, but the second project would turn out so much better. So I don't think that's how I work. It's another very interesting question. For me, a bucket list pattern was a christening gown. Did you or do you have such a pattern? Yes and no. I mean, here in Europe, we have a lot of museums, and they often have fabulous knitwear. Here in Vienna, there's a museum where there is an old christening gown from the Austrian emperor. So it's very, very fine lace, and it's so fine that I'm not even sure it is knitted, but I suspect it is. And when I see these things, I go like, yes, that is something that's something that interests me. But of course, then I go, what do I do with a christening gown? So I don't do that. So I think there are patterns that are really. So I have a list of patterns that I want to knit, but no, not really a bucket list. Next is a very interesting question. What do you enjoy in knitting that you don't necessarily make videos about? For example, do you have a favorite lace technique or sock pattern you use in your private knitting but that you haven't filmed that? Absolutely. I just mentioned these socks, and I would never even dream of filming that. What most people don't realize is how very, very difficult it is to film your knitting. Because ultimately, people want to see what you're doing, and the finer the gauge, the bigger a macro lens you need. And these macro lenses have a very, very, even if the aperture is wide open, they have a very shallow depth of field. So you have maybe one or two, a margin of 1 centimeter or 3 centimeters where everything is in focus. But if you move your knitting in your hand, suddenly things are out of focus. So then you have to undo or redo that. And the more complicated things are, or the larger the project, the more frustrating that is. So I get a lot of questions about doing a sweater tutorial, and I don't do that because I know it takes 40 or 50 hours to knit a complicated sweater, and I would basically have to knit it 3 times, so to ensure everything is in focus, everything is understandable. And the same applies to socks like these. It would be just so frustrating for me, and that's why I don't do this. So there's actually a lot of things that I don't film. Next question. How many works in progress do you have going at once usually? Do you have any projects that you've left unfinished? Well, I still have this huge granny square crochet blanket that is waiting to be finished. Well, it's been 10 years or so. But other than that, I don't have that many works in progress. But I typically have like 3 or 4. So I typically have a very relaxing kind of project, like simple plain vanilla socks or a beanie, something like that, that I can knit on the go when I'm at the knitting meetup or in the car, on the plane, in the train. Then I typically have a more challenging project, something that I enjoy, and typically a pattern or a video or some swatches that I am working. So I would say 3 to 4, but not so many unfinished projects, or typically none at all. That's not how I work. Next question. Do you gift knit? If so, do the people you knit for really understand what goes into a project you are gifting them? I absolutely do gift knit, and actually for this Christmas I knitted quite a lot of things. So for me, I am a person that actually enjoys gifting. it's something that really brings me joy. But of course, do the people really realize how much work goes into knitting? No, I don't think if you. I mean, they know it's a lot of work, but if you are not a knitter or a crocheter or do sewing, I don't think you ever will totally understand. But they appreciate it and they really enjoy wearing those things. And whenever I see someone works that way and they don't throw it in the washing machine at 60 degree or so, well, then I enjoy that. Do you keep a file or card of every project with the pattern, size, swatch, yarn used, and amount, cost, and notes? I would say yes and no. I mean, these days a lot of my knitting is for my blog and I document that. So my blog and the patterns I release kind of are that. But other than that, I mean, like for my parents and my partner, I do in my notebook, I keep notes of their size and how many with which yarn I cast on how many stitches for a sock. So I would say yes and no, but not like every project. Only those projects I kind of feel I could be repeating those. The next set of questions all revolve around knitting as a whole. So I'm gonna take another sip of tea here, and it's actually gonna be cold and tepid. Well, so what do you love most about knitting? Why do you think you enjoy it so much, and why do you think you enjoy it now, or why is it so important for you to knit and keep knitting? Well, I think for me, knitting is a bit of a coping mechanism and a way to relax. I'm a guy who is well, for me, meditation is very easy. And what most people don't realize is meditation is not about sitting like that and chanting or something like that. I mean, this can be one out of a million other meditation techniques, but knitting actually can be meditation. Climbing can be, cycling can be. A lot of people come to this point where they get into a trance, and for me, knitting, when I knit, this happens very, very quickly. And so for me, knitting is all about, having this 1 hour in the evening where I can utterly relax and utterly forget everything that worries me. So I think that it is why it is so important to me. Next question. What bad habits did you have to unlearn, or can you develop bad habits? I would say no, there is not a lot that I had to unlearn. I mean, I may do a video about knitting pain in the future. So posture and learning to take breaks and sitting on the right kind of chair, especially as I turned this into a job. Well, that is certainly something I had to, well, I wouldn't say unlearn, but, well, pay a little bit more attention to. And that is certainly a bad habit you could develop. But other than that, I mean, it's a hobby. So as long as you take care of your body, I would say no. But of course, when this turned into a job, certainly that was something I had to re-examine. Here is a question. What is the most challenging technique for you to master? Well, I would definitely say, and I already mentioned, intarsia in the round is one of these techniques that I feel is not meant to be. So that is very challenging. But other than that, I am doing this for a living now. So I am not sure a lot is challenging. I mean, I feel that some projects are easier, but it's not like, no, right now I'm in a lucky position that I don't feel anything is truly challenging anymore. But yeah, some things are maybe a little bit more complicated. Do you know every stitch, or do you have to learn stitches? Do you like to learn new stitches? Absolutely. I love when I hear someone talking about a new way to knit a certain stitch or a new stitch altogether, that I instantly pick up my yarn and have to knit a swatch and go like, what's that? So that is something that brings me joy. And I would definitely say that I don't know every stitch, and sometimes I shoot a tutorial about something like a very exotic stitch, and I do have to look because you don't need that for every project, or maybe 1 out of 100 projects, and then I have to go back to my own notes or tutorials and look that up again. So I absolutely don't know every technique, and even those I know how to do, sometimes I have to look them up as well. You can't know everything, and that's quite okay. How many hours a day, a week do you knit for your private things, or do you just knit for YouTube or your blog? Yeah, well, I have to say, if I'm lucky, I can eke out maybe an hour a day for private knitting, and often I don't find the time. I do knit quite a lot for my blog, so probably 2 hours a day, but that's typically just swatches and maybe a pattern, but often it's just boring swatches that I unravel or just throw away. So I would definitely say, if you ever thought about starting a knitting business, you definitely should know that your private knitting will suffer a lot. Do you knit in Wiener Kaffeehäuser, Vienna coffee houses? Yes, not a coffee house or a cafe house is something very particular, but in public at restaurants, or we have a knitting meetup and things like that. Yes, I do that. Norman, what gives you inspiration for your designs? Well, difficult question. Basically everything. Sometimes I go to a museum or see a documentary with all patterns, and I go like, typically it is knitting. Maybe it is a mural or ancient scroll work or so, and I go like, well, that would be nice chaos or color work or something like that. So, but everything. So I go a lot to museums. I love the opera. I read a lot. So basically life. My question would be, how long did it take you to learn how to knit continental style? Maybe a year, 2 years or so. But I do have to admit that it took me quite a while to feel comfortable around purling. I mean, I learned it, but probably 4 to 5 years until I felt comfortable with purling. So, but yeah, because this is so long ago, I can't really answer. But probably 5, 6, 7 years until I felt or 10 years even, until I felt considerably comfortable. So yeah, I hope this answers it, because it's so long ago, so very difficult to answer. Do you knit constantly all year long, or do you have periods like autumn to spring when you love to knit a lot more? Well, I mean, these days it's a job for me, so I don't think I have these periods, but I would say that I knit different kind of projects. So for example, I still have this sweater here lying around, which I started in spring, and then we had this very, very, very hot summer, so I put that project to the side and I was more focused and busy with other projects. So I think in summer and spring I changed things up, but other than that I knit all year round, and I think with the same kind of intensity. Next question. Do you also feel pain on your wrists while knitting? If so, how do you relieve it? This is very, very important. The second that you feel even the slightest hunch of pain or discomfort in your wrist, back, whatever, Stop knitting, take a break. Any professional will be able to tell you that it is 10 times harder to cure pain than to prevent it. I'm speaking from personal experience, so it's very, very important to take breaks. I'm speaking from personal experience. Once you have a tendonitis, it will take weeks, sometimes even a month to go away. Whereas if you just stop knitting the second you feel a slight discomfort and stop for a day or two, maybe do some stretching exercise and strengthening exercises, and you come back to knitting 2 days later, the pain is gone and the discomfort, and you can knit for 2 hours again. However, if you push past that point and you have an inflammation or a carpal tunnel syndrome or whatever, it will be very, very difficult and to fix that, and it will take quite a lot of time. So take breaks, set yourself a timer on your mobile phone for 15 minutes, and after 50 or 20 minutes, take a break. Very important, and that's basically how I prevent it. I have do my yoga in the morning. Not every morning. I do stretching exercises, and I don't knit for 4 hours non-stop in the same posture. Next question. There are so many wonderful things to knit, and I have many in my queue. I've purchased the yarn and the patterns, but I'm not a fast knitter. How do you handle the frustration of not being able to knit everything you want? Also, what do you do with the excess items you have completed? Well, first of all, if you're not a fast knitter, I want to repeat this. Knitting should bring you joy. So it's not about the speed, but the joy it brings you. And does it frustrate me that I can't finish all the stuff that I want to knit? Absolutely. But I think this is a positive thing, because the alternative would be that you don't have any ideas, that you don't have any inspiration, and you constantly go like, well, I love knitting, but I don't know what to do. So if you have a lot of these ideas, I take it as a beautiful sign of my creativity. So I don't think that should ever be frustrating. And the last part of this question, what do you do with excess items you have completed? Well, I don't ever knit anything that will be excess, so I always knit something. So whenever I knit something, I have a plan for that. And if I don't have a plan, I don't knit that. So I would re-examine actually my knitting habits and ask myself, is what I'm knitting, is that something I need? And need, well, it doesn't have to be used. A lot of people knit for their family or for charity or something like that. That too can be a need. But whenever I start a project, I definitely would look into things, well, who or what will need it? I hope this answers it. What is the thing you were the most stuck on when you were learning? Well, I think I partially answered this. But nothing like that, but nothing really. But I do have to say that purling for the longest time gave me problems until I developed my own technique. Interestingly enough, a technique others people invented, as Elizabeth Zimmerman would say as well. And yeah, purling maybe. So everyone who feels purling is difficult, I hope that gives you hope. Would you knit in public transport? Knitting is typically a female hobby. How is it in Germany? Have you had to deal with negative verbal comments when you've been knitting in public? Did you ever feel embarrassed about knitting if you started at a young age? Some of you saw my recent video about a very weird comment I received. So, yes, I have received my share of comments, but actually very, very rarely in public. The only thing, so first things first, yes, I do knit in public and very frequently, because if you're on the plane, if you're waiting somewhere, it is a fabulous way to spend time. Others, you sit on your commute, public transport, in the plane, and others endlessly scroll on their mobile phone, and that's just wasting time, and you do something productive and produce useful items. So I do that frequently, but the only thing typically that happens is that people come and say, oh, it's so amazing to see a man knitting, and I go like, well, what's amazing about that? But that's possibly the only thing that ever happens. So it's a very great conversation starter, and I mean, sometimes you do get an odd look and stare, but as I said at the beginning of this video, doesn't really matter, it's their problem. But yes, I do that a lot, but I never really felt embarrassed about that, not even at a young age. But that's not how I roll, I guess. Next question, do you have any other hobbies or secret talents? Well, I always say I know magic, I can turn money into yarn. I have other hobbies, so I love going to the opera. That's a very, very big hobby. Classical music is a very, very big hobby of mine. I love reading and lyrics, poetry, so that's something I love. I love cooking, and gardening a little bit. So yes, and traveling. So I do have a lot of other hobbies. Next question, how do you boost your motivation to knit and also to keep producing these videos that we also love so much? I was never ever someone, so when people talk about second sock syndrome and knitting socks at 2 at a time, that is something I never understood. For me, I have a very, very strong work ethic, and that I don't think I would be it would physically be possible for me to only knit one sock or something like that, or to not go to work, or not to get up in the morning and start working. I think for me, I even at a very young age, I knew that it is wasting time. I mean, sometimes I don't have an inspiration, and that can be a problem, and then I take a break and do something else. But other than that, no, I think for me it is very important to not waste time, and but other people are different than that, and I guess I have other problems, obviously, but motivation was never mine. Lucky for you, I guess. I would like to know more about how you organize your knitting needles. Well, I'm not affiliated with them, but I showed them quite a lot of time. I love these Bodolina cases. I'm going to put a little picture up in here. But other than that, well, I don't think I haven't really found the perfect way to organize my needles. Well, I typically keep them, I have a big drawer or cabinet with my needles, and I typically keep them in their pouches. But I haven't found the perfect way, because you can't mix ChiaoGoo with Knitter's Pride, then things don't fit. And if you put all ChiaoGoo needles in one little case, well, you constantly have to check, which are the 3mm needles. So I haven't found the perfect system, but those Bodolina cases, they are super, super smart. Next question. How do you decide on your next project? Do you have multiple ongoing projects at once, or finish one before starting the next? So these days I typically decide on the project. Well, So I know what you guys want to see, like in terms of tutorials and patterns. I know that, so I keep a list, and basically I kind of do a mixture. So I go through the list and go like, well, what would bring me the most joy right now? What would be a seasonal thing? And then I, well, pick one from that list. And the second part was, well, more multiple ongoing projects. No, I think I already answered this. But sometimes test knitting and tech editing takes a lot of time, so there are overlaps. What was the thing you learned, technique, spark, that really elevated you and took you to the next level in your hobby? Your eureka moment. I don't think there was this single moment, but I think I answered this in the previous video. I think starting this blog forced me to re-examine my whole knitting, and that really helped me on the next level. So I think I grew tremendously in the past 2.5 years. Yeah, so starting a YouTube channel was but other than that, no, I don't think it was a very gradual thing, and not like a so. But I mean, maybe that's different these days, where you can watch YouTube videos, where you have someone like me present you with 10 knitting tips or something like that. For me, that never happened, so it was more like a steady climb up the mountain, which is ongoing, I guess. I'm curious what you do when knitting, listening to or watching something, and what determines if you'll do something else while knitting or not, from when you first learned to now. So I am I'm a hypersensitive person, so I very, very rarely listen to anything or watch anything while knitting. So typically for me it is complete silence, and sometimes some podcasts when I know it's a project, plain stock knit stitch, like plain vanilla socks or so. But other than that, for me it's actually silence, and I'm also not watching anything except plain vanilla socks, but silence really, and that hasn't changed in the past years or so. Another question: did you set goals for yourself, and what do you still want to achieve? No, I don't. Well, I mean, I have patterns that I want to knit, but no, not like goals, like in 1 year. But probably because there is not little left, but little left that I know of. So I don't have any goals like in 2 years I want to knit in Tasha and around on 1 milli needles using silk yarn or something like that. No, I don't have that. Only occasionally I come across a technique, and then I want to do a project with that, but and I never really did that. No, I don't think I did that. In the last section of this video, I would like to address all questions regarding the professional side of knitting, and the first one is: how did you learn to be such a good teacher? Have you trained people professionally in other areas? What was your work before knitting became full-time? Well, interesting question. Before I started this knitting blog and YouTube channel, I actually had a travel blog, and I thought travel would be my future. Of course, then COVID happened, and I was scrambling to find a different occupation, and basically that's how all this here started. Before that, I was working in product management, or rather digital product management, for a stock market information company, and that was 10 years. And before that I was working in the commodity sector, specifically precious metals, and I even wrote a book about precious metal, but it's in German. So I was doing that, but none of it involved teaching at all. So I would actually say it caught me by surprise that so many of you, quite apparently, we're over 100,000 people here on this channel now, thought or really enjoy the way I teach. I would say everything I approach in a very analytical manner, and that stands in a very stark contrast to other channels on YouTube, on other knitting channels on YouTube. I'm not saying, I specifically want to mention, I'm not saying they are bad, but maybe my analytical approach filled a niche. I mean, there are others, obviously, but maybe that filled a niche and that really works for you, while for others it doesn't. So I really can't answer this question to you, but maybe because everything I learned is self-taught. I never took a course. For the longest time there wasn't the internet, and YouTube videos as we know them weren't a thing either. Maybe because of that journey, I know exactly what worked so well for me and what didn't, and there was a lot of trial and error involved. Maybe because I too was struggling along the way or faced a lot of challenges. Maybe that, in combination with my rather analytical approach, works out so well, but it's actually pure luck, and as I just said, it took me by surprise. Next question: what motivated you to teach knitting and choose YouTube as a platform? What motivated you to knit and dedicate your life to it? Well, what motivated me? Well, money, basically. So it was early 2019. I thought I had a wonderful future in the travel industry, and from one day to another everything came to a halt. And back then I knew this is gonna last for more than just 3 months, because I studied chemistry, very long ago, and I knew how long it will take to develop medicine and vaccines and stuff like that. So I had two options. Either in the unlikely case this is going to be over in 3 months, well, I can always go back to my travel blog and travel in the travel industry, or this is going to take more than 3 months, and then my savings aren't gonna last. So I knew I had to do something, and I had to, and I didn't want to throw everything overboard, so I knew how to run a blog and all that. So I thought, well, let's keep doing websites. But what about? So my other hobbies, just as I just mentioned, is knitting, cooking. But my kitchen back in my apartment in Munich was very small, so I knew that would never work when filming stuff. And then I thought, well, knitting could be something that is well in demand during a pandemic. So basically that's why I picked it. And why YouTube? Well, teaching knitting without moving pictures is pretty hard. I mean, I have tutorials on my blog with pictures and written instructions, and that a lot of people enjoy that. But I thought, well, without video, this is never gonna work. I mean, I hated hearing my own voice and seeing myself on camera, but I knew if I wouldn't be doing that, success would be hard. And luckily, very early on, I saw and noticed I'm onto something, and that's why I continued doing this. But this was nothing of this was planned. It was just pure luck or coincidence. And I guess this brings me directly to the next question here. When and how did you realize you want to turn your hobby into work? I assume you had a job in another field and you did this parallel. Well, as I just said, I had a job in another field, and I did the travel blogging parallel for a long time. And then at one point I earned enough that I was able to make the switch. Starting this knitting business was, COVID basically forced me to do this. But if you decide maybe you are one of these people who thinks, well, maybe I should start knitting, I would definitely recommend doing this parallel for a rather long time, even if you have savings. But I think being a digital creator, as they say these days, you need to wear a lot of hats. So I need to stand here in front of the camera, but at the same time, I also need to stand behind the camera, do the editing, run the blog, all the administration that comes along with it. I get questions, so there's customer service involved. So you need to do a lot of these things, and often you need to work a lot of long hours. And I think you should kind of test this, because it is not for everyone. Actually, it is only for a selected few individuals. So doing it parallel for quite a long time, I think that is recommended. Next question here. Although it may seem a bit obvious through watching the progression of your videos, how did you decide to focus so well on techniques as your own niche? You do this exceedingly well. Well, thank you. So I didn't decide on this very early on. So I started the website, and I knew a lot about knitting. I knew a lot about running a website, but I knew very, very little about how you could earn money with knitting and make a living. So I didn't know anything. I didn't have a network either, beyond Knitting Pal here and there. So very early I thought, okay, I need to try everything. So I said, okay, I'll try YouTube, I'll try Instagram, I'll try Pinterest, I'll try this blog thing, I'll try patterns, I'll try techniques. So I kind of spread myself all over the whole knitting community, and tried this and this and this. And I set myself the goal. So I'll try this for 3 months. I'll do everything. And that was very, very exhausting. And I tried everything. And then I checked, okay, what works, what seems to work. So I'll do a little bit more of that, a bit less than that. And after 6 months, so it was a very gradual thing. And I kept doing a lot of other things, and they weren't successful. So probably that's why you're not aware of this. But I didn't actually decide on this technique thing. I just continued doing more of what worked and less of what didn't work, and that's why I arrived at this. And even today I still try new things. Take this episode. So everything I did so far is about teaching, not everything, but most of it's tutorials. And this episode here is quite a little bit different, because basically I'm just talking about myself and answering your questions. And then after this episode aired, I'm gonna check, well, how well did it perform? Will I be repeating this, or maybe I shouldn't? So that's how I do things. And here is the last question, and it's in German, and I'm gonna read this in German because maybe some of you want to hear me speak German for a change. Warum sind all deine Videos auf Englisch? Ist das nicht anstrengend? Hi Norman, ich würde gerne von dir erfahren, warum du als Deutscher einen englischsprachigen YouTube-Kanal führst. Frage einer Deutschen an einen Deutschen. To translate this, why are all your videos in English? Isn't this exhausting? Hi Norman, I would like to know why you as a German run an English-speaking YouTube channel. Question from a German to a German. So why do I do this? Well, as I just said, so it was 2019 and I was basically scrambling. I didn't know what the future would hold, much like anyone else. And then I decided on, well, let's try out this knitting blog and knitting YouTube channel thing. But everything was new. I mean, not the knitting part, but the professional side of knitting. But I did know how to monetize an English speaking or an English blog, I didn't know how that worked. I didn't know how that would work in the German market, because you need agencies, you need partners. You can't really do this alone. You need someone who runs the ads and stuff like that. So I didn't know how to do that in Germany or in this German-speaking countries at all. So I thought, well, the knitting, professional side of knitting, that's already a big bite to swallow. And I don't need more uncertainty. So basically, that is why I did it in English. Convenience, one would say. And then I noticed, well, I might be onto something better. Continue doing that, and I guess lucky for you. So that was the last question on my list, but of course, if you still have any question about me, knitting in general, my knitting blog, or the knitting community and business, then comment below and I'll try to get back to you. And of course, also comment if you enjoyed this episode and if you would like to see more videos like this one, or should I go back to tutorials? I certainly have a lot of very exciting tutorials and topics planned for the next year. I can't wait to share with you. And I guess since there won't be another episode in this year, this also means I want to wish you a very, very happy new year. Happy knitting, and see you in 2023.